The wind carried a whisper through the heather as Nora sat on the back porch, cradling a mug of lukewarm tea. The sky hung heavy with late autumn clouds, and her tabby cat, Elsie, was a blur of movement among the fading blooms. At 17, Elsie had slowed down considerably, but that morning something had awakened in her. She was pawing fiercely at the dirt beneath the rusting sundial, kicking up damp earth with purpose. Nora smiled faintly. "Still got a bit of kitten in you," she murmured. But Elsie wasn't playing. Her small paws worked with urgency, tail rigid, ears sharply forward. Dirt flew in small arcs. Something about the determined digging unsettled Nora. She set down her tea and walked toward the garden bed, her boots squelching in the soft soil. "Elle, what are you up to, love?" The cat didn't look up. Her paw struck something. Not a root, not a stone. A dull thud echoed. Nora's breath caught as she crouched beside the sundial and brushed the earth away. A glimmer of metal peeked through the soil, wrapped in a gauze of time and decay. A rusted tin box, its hinges seized, was buried there, less than a foot below the surface. Nora reached for it with trembling fingers. As the lid creaked open, a damp, moldy scent filled the air. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper and something else, something that made Nora stagger back and sit hard in the dirt. A child's shoe, tiny, scuffed and stained with something too dark to be soil. Nora carried the box into the kitchen, placing it on the worn table as if it might shatter. Elsie followed, her green eyes never leaving the box. She leapt silently onto a chair, tail curling tightly around her paws, as if guarding what she'd found. Nora unfolded the brittle paper. Faded ink spelled a name. Clara, 1973. Clara. The name sounded familiar, like an echo trapped in the wallpaper of her childhood home. She grew up in this very house. After her mother passed 2 years ago, she returned, partly out of obligation, partly in search of something she hadn't been able to name. But that name, Clara, rattled something loose in her memory. A photograph once buried in a drawer. 2 little girls under the heather bush, one with a wide grin, Nora herself, the other more solemn, eyes dark and serious, Clara. The past rolled in like a fog. There had been whispers back then. A little girl who came to play for a summer and never came back. Nora's mother had said they moved away, but had they? Nora stared at the shoe. A memory flashed. Elsie as a kitten, pawing at that same spot by the sundial. Her mother had shooed the cat away, muttering that she was digging up trouble. Suddenly, Nora couldn't breathe. She opened the back door and stood on the porch, cold air scraping her lungs. Elsie nudged her ankle gently, her soft purr grounding Nora to the present. Something lay buried, not just in the garden, but in her own forgotten past. The attic hadn't changed much. Dust motes danced in slivers of light as Nora climbed the creaking stairs. Elsie was perched on the landing, watching, waiting. Nora reached for the old cedar trunk against the far wall, her mother's. Inside, beneath moth-eaten sweaters and a faded quilt, lay a stack of journals tied with a ribbon, frayed from decades of touch. She chose one from the year 1973. The pages were neat, written in her mother's careful hand. At first, it was all mundane. Grocery lists, appointments, the weather. Then came July. Clara is such a quiet girl. She watches Nora constantly. It's unsettling. They argued today over something small. Nora cried. I scolded her, but I'm not sure it was her fault. Found Clara hiding behind the heather bush again, refuses to say why. The entries became shorter after that, more fragmented. Clara is gone. They said her family left in the night. No forwarding address. The police asked questions, but I told them what I knew. I told them what I had to. Nora's hands trembled. The last entry from that year read simply, God forgive me. I buried the rest. A cold shiver passed through her. She clutched Elsie to her chest, the cat's warmth the only thing keeping her grounded. The heather bush, the sundial, the shoe. Clara hadn't moved away. And now Nora had to face the truth, not just about the garden, but about her own childhood and what had been hidden from her for 50 years. That night, sleep evaded Nora. The wind howled around the corners of the old house like a child's distant sob. She lay in bed, clutching the journal to her chest, Elsie curled protectively by her side. By morning, Nora had made her decision. She would call the authorities. It was too late for Clara, but maybe, just maybe, the truth could be honored now. But before she could pick up the phone, Elsie meowed sharply at the window. Nora turned and saw her already leaping from the sill, tail high, heading back toward the garden. Nora followed. The sundial's soil was disturbed again. Elsie was circling it, pawing lightly, not to dig this time, but to point. Nora knelt. Her fingers brushed something hard. Another box. No, it was a small tin locket. She opened it slowly. Inside was a picture. 2 girls, cheek to cheek. Herself, maybe 5 years old, smiling wide. And Clara. Quiet, dark-eyed Clara. On the other side of the locket, etched faintly in tiny letters, "Forever friends." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. "I didn't remember you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Elsie pressed her head into Nora's hand. She stayed there as Nora cried, the autumn wind wrapping around them like a shroud. The detectives arrived quietly. They listened, took the journal, photographed the box and the shoe, and treated the sundial site with solemn care. Nora answered every question, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside. By afternoon, the garden was cordoned off. Beneath the heather, bones were found, small, fragile, long buried in silence. The medical examiner confirmed what Nora had feared: a child, likely Clara. They were gentle with her. The officers didn't accuse. They saw the truth in her eyes, the heartbreak, the not knowing, the decades stolen by someone else's lie. "We'll do everything we can," one of them said softly. Nora nodded. She watched as they carried the remains away, a stillness settling over the garden. That night, she placed the locket on the mantel. A candle flickered beside it. Elsie lay near her feet, purring low and constant, as if to say, "You did it. You saw her." Weeks passed. The frost came early, and the garden grew quiet beneath a crust of silver. Nora received a letter. Plain envelope, government seal. It confirmed what she already knew in her bones. The remains matched Clara's records. Her family had long passed, but the case was now marked as resolved, thanks to a tip from a local resident and her observant pet. The words struck Nora as too clinical, but she appreciated the finality. She wrote a letter of her own, one she couldn't send but needed to write. To Clara, "I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry no one protected you. I hope you can rest now, not beneath cold soil, but in some warm place I can't see yet. Thank you for finding me again. Or maybe it was Elsie who found you. Either way, I remember now, and I won't forget again." She buried it beneath the heather, beneath a new marker, a small stone with Clara's name and the year carved by hand. Elsie aged quickly after that, as if her duty had been fulfilled. She no longer played or hunted. Instead, she followed Nora like a quiet shadow, curling into her lap, resting her chin on Nora's wrist as she read. One cold morning, Nora awoke to find Elsie not beside her. She found her in the garden beneath the heather, curled in a perfect crescent, still and soft, her body already cold. Nora gathered her into her arms, the weight feather-light, and sobbed until the sun broke through the mist. She buried Elsie beside Clara's stone. 2 small markers, 2 lives that had crossed hers in ways she could never fully explain. The house grew quiet, but the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. Sometimes, when the wind rustled the heather just so, Nora would pause on the porch, hand on her chest, and she could almost hear it, a purr, a whisper, a child's giggle, dancing through the garden like light through old leaves. They were all still there, watching, waiting, home.